Welcome to our 22nd annual Reverend Dr. Martin Luther King Jr. celebration. My name is Linda Mason, and I am current president of the Montachusett MLK Coalition. For the past 21 years, we have presented a program in Leominster, Massachusetts to honor MLK's life and legacy. This is our 22nd year. Unlike those past years, we are presenting during a pandemic and are connecting with you virtually. While we are thankful for the technology to do so, we especially appreciate the array of help that we have received to make this possible. Our program theme and focus this year is Antidotes for Fear. Today, in 2021, we remember and reflect on the life and legacy of MLK, who worked tirelessly toward a more just society. MLK led the movement, but he was not alone in devoting his life to civil rights. A few notables from the civil rights movement who left us in 2020 are the Reverend Joseph Lowery, called the Dean of Civil Rights of the Civil Rights Movement. He worked hand in hand with the movement's formative years with the Reverends Martin Luther King Jr. and Jesse Jackson. He worked for a single cause, to address the injustices of the criminal justice system, particularly toward poor black men. A leader in America's civil rights movement, he died on March 27, 2020. He was 98. Two titans of the American civil rights movement died on July 17, 2020, a major loss for a nation still grappling with the protest and demands for racial equality. U.S. Congressman John Robert Lewis died at age 80, and the Reverend Cordy Tyndall, C.T. Vivian, died at age 95. Like MLK, they championed nonviolence as an approach to confronting injustices. They worked alongside MLK in the forefront of the historic struggle for racial justice in the 1960s. At the height of the push for justice, their beatings at the protest galvanized support that led to key changes. After years of arrest, confrontations, and unyielding demands for justice, they received the highest civilian award from the nation's first black president. Charles Evers, with no black voters in Fayette, Mississippi, won his mayoral bid in 1969 after he mounted registration drives that took the number of black registered voters from 0 to 450. He won as the first black elected mayor in Mississippi, a position he held for 16 years. Another fearless civil rights leader, he died on July 22, 2020. The Honorable James Charles Evers lived to be 97 years old. The Reverend Gilbert Gill Caldwell, a civil rights icon who was part of the Selma Bloody Sunday March and the March on Washington, died Friday, September 4, 2020. He was 86. These contemporaries of MLK marched alongside, endured threats, and faced fear of violence, yet lived their lives with the courage and conviction that future generations might benefit from their fight for justice. In these turbulent times, politically and pandemically, many seek solace in the face of fear. We hope that the messages shared throughout the mediums of music, speech, and discussion move, motivate, and fortify us all against fear.
Lift every voice and sing till earth and heaven ring with Sing a song full of the faith that the dark past has taught us. Sing a song full of the hope that the present has brought us. Facing the rising sun of our new day begun. Let us march on till victory is won. Stony the road we trod, bitter the chasing rod, felt in the day when hope unborn had died, yet with a steady beat had not our weary feet come to the place for which our fathers died. We have come over a way that with tears have been watered. We have come treading our path through the blood of the slaughtered, out from the gloomy past, till now we stand at last, where the white gleam of our bright star is cast. God of our weary years, God of our silent tears, Thou who hast brought us thus far on the way, Thou who hast by Thy might led us into the light. Keep us forever in the path, we pray. Lest our feet stray from the places, our God, where we met Thee. Lest our hearts, drunk with the wine of the world, we forget Thee. Shadowed beneath Thy hand, may we forever stand true to our God, true to our native land. Lift every voice and
Eternal God, out of whose mind this great cosmic universe we bless thee. Help us to seek that which is high, noble, and good. Help us in the moment of difficult decision. Help us to work with renewed vigor for a warless world, a better distribution of wealth, and a brotherhood that transcends race or color. Amen.
And now it's my pleasure to introduce our keynote speaker, Irene Hernandez. Irene is a longtime community advocate with a background in social work. She is currently working as the director of Active Life Adult Day Health Center. Irene sits on many boards, commissions, committees, and councils at the local and state level, where she champions excellence and equity for our communities and those underserved. Irene has worked to create bridges with local and state agencies and institutions to bring about systemic change, advocacy, and the identification of resources for our community. Irene has served for many years as the assistant to the former mayor of Fitchburg, Lisa Wong, and has also served as a project manager for the Tri-City Anti-Gang Violence Program for the cities of Fitchburg, Leominster, and Gardner. Over the years, Irene has spearheaded several innovative and impactful initiatives, including the Torch Youth Leadership Training and the Fitchburg Alcalde de su Calle program, featured on CNN. In her addition to her many community roles, Irene is a proud wife, mother, and strong ally in our community. Please welcome Irene Hernandez.
Hey, thank you so much. I'm so excited to be here. Uh, I just would like to take a deep breath, right? Because we get to remember Martin Luther King Jr. and his legacy, and we get to really take a deep breath because this last year, it just brought everything to a head. We've known for centuries, we've been oppressed for centuries, we've been subjugated for centuries, and we've suffered for centuries. And the culmination of all these things last year just came to a head, and it was a tough, tough year for all of us. Um, and I would just like to take a deep breath for a moment and just reflect and just notice what happens for you. I also would like to take a moment of silence, a minute, just to reflect on those that we've lost. And most recently, one of our civil rights advocate in our area, um, Adrian Ford, who passed away on Saturday morning. So I would just like to take a moment um, and reflect, notice, and just have a moment of silence. As we ponder and we reflect the works of Martin Luther King and his day today, right? To celebrate his birthday, to celebrate his legacy, and in his life, what he was able to accomplish. And not just that, but the foundations from which we still continue to move forward in. Um, I was thinking about some of the speeches that he gave, some of the quotes that he gave in 1957 and 1963. And all of those things still resonate today, still. We're still battling the same issues that we did 50, 60, 70 years ago, 80, 90, 100 years ago. And that just goes to tell us that we get to figure this out. We get to interrupt this narrative that continues to haunt the United States, that continue to haunt Black and Brown, Indigenous people. We get to really interrupt that. And I was reflecting, I was looking at the antidotes of fear, for fear, from Martin Luther King. And his first sermon that he wrote on that, it was for his church in 1957. And he was talking about just what fear is, right? So right away, when people think about fear, they think about they're scared and anxiety and, oh my goodness, what am I going to do? However, fear is essential. Fear is essential so that we get to live, but there's an abnormal side to fear, right? So a normal fear is I'm going to walk into the middle of the street, probably get hit, right? So guess what we don't do? We don't walk into the middle of the street. We look both ways before we cross. That's normal. What's abnormal is we watch a movie and we see Black and brown people portrayed in stereotypical roles as criminals and such. And then all of a sudden, it is painted in our head that every single Black and brown and indigenous person is a violent criminal. That's irrational. That's abnormal. Fear has kept us alive throughout the last 2,000 years, 4,000, 5,000 years, whatever your belief system is. Fear has kept us alive. Fear is necessary for our progress because it shows up in ways that we get to reflect and notice. What does that look like to us? Is it motivating us? Is it motivating us to become better, to associate, to interrupt, to create a better tomorrow for one another? So in the antidotes of fear that Martin Luther King talked about, he illustrated the normal and abnormal ways that fear shows up. And he used Sigmund Freud, and he talked about how, you're in the middle of Africa and you're in the jungle and you're so scared, you don't know what to do, you don't know where to run or hide because you're scared of snakes and there's poisonous snakes in Africa. And the other one would be a person who's living in a building and thinks that there's poisonous snakes under his carpet, right? So it's really simple. It's really simple. And fear is that poison that keeps us in anxiety, that keeps us hating, that keeps us creating these views on others that are not reality. When normal fear protects us, but abnormal fear, it paralyzes us. Abnormal fear is a constant poison. And as we've noticed all these years, as we noticed in the news, even last week, even the week before, the injustices and inequities that people of color, indigenous, Black and brown people face every day. There are things that we are not able to do just because we show up in color. And it's not right or wrong, good or bad. Our history, it's our history. We get to shift it because it's damaging. We get to shift it because of the pain, the atrocities. We get to shift those funky places. We get to think about our ancestors and their traumas. We get to reflect on the genocide, on the rapes and murder. Yeah, it's funky, it's nasty, it's despicable, but it was generated from fear, from that abnormal fear. Martin Luther King always kept aligned to truth. He kept aligned to his belief in the God of Israel, to Yahweh, to his son Jesus, Yeshua. Perfect peace, perfect love can drive away fear. And then we had others who were radicals who would use the information from the Bible and the Torah and other beliefs to justify their oppression, the subjugation and torture, mutilation and genocide of people of color over the centuries. And we get to acknowledge and be aware. And a lot of what Martin Luther King Jr., Dr. Martin Luther King Jr., left us was a lot of notice, a lot of reflection, and a lot of breaking through. By bringing fear to the forefront of our minds, of our consciousness, you can find that a lot of these things, they're imaginary and not real. But some of them, as he said, will turn up as snakes underneath our carpets in our apartment building. Once we understand the cause of fear, then we can challenge it, we can interrupt it, we can have conversations. But as long as we continue to keep that door closed, as long as we keep to ignore it, even though it's something that continues to pulse and to generate anxiety and irrational fears and thoughts about people that we don't even know. As long as that continues to perpetuate and you do nothing about it, it will continue to grow. It will continue to be that monster that shows up, that discredits others for their historical data, for their history, for their experiences. We get to be courageous and we get to take that power back. We get to look inside because I believe that all of this has to do with the heart. That's just my opinion. It gets to be about looking inward. And for people of color, it gets to be I said it and I said it. I don't need permission from anyone. I don't need to explain myself and bring all my credentials and evidence when I'm having a conversation so that you may believe me. You get to choose where you want to have these conversations and with whom. And like they said, you do not throw your best pearls to swine. And if folks don't want to engage in these conversations that can really shift humanity, then we get to go to the next person and the next person and the next person, because not everyone is going to close that door, but many will open it and welcome these conversations. And that takes courage. That takes this inner resolution with you, in spite of how scary it is to invite these conversations that may be uncomfortable. Martin Luther King Jr., he believed it was so, and that we were able. He believed that we could walk and march and shift the thinking of others. He believed that he could lock his arms hand in hand with his brothers and sisters from different races, religions, backgrounds, and shift the dialogue in this country. And he did. And he did. And he did. And we're still talking about it because we still get to continue to shift that dialogue, to interrupt that dialogue. We get to have these conversations, and we continue to endure because we're courageous. We get to create our own self-affirmations with one another. We get to master in those places where we're cowards and we don't interrupt those conversations, those dialogues, and those narratives. The only way that we can shift is by acknowledging it. It is always in the room. For people of color, Black and brown people, and Indigenous people, we wake up every single day, every day, as people of color, as Black and brown, and as Indigenous people. We don't get a break. We're not thinking just of the kids are going to school, we get to go to work, we get to be on time. No, we're thinking about, oh my goodness, I got to be careful. Where's my son going to be? What time does he get to be home? Oh my goodness, what about if this happens? We're always thinking about all these other things that influence our life. And it's an extra load that we get to shift. We get to unpack that so that we can live in the same freedom as our brothers and sisters that are not of color. We live in uncertain times, and the height of racism, it just breaks my heart. It breaks my heart that over 48% of our population, they think it's okay. They think that the dialogue between them and us should be them talking down to us. They think that we have no contribution, but we've all given the greatest contribution to building America, to building all of the Americas. We have been the backbone. We have been the cornerstone and the foundation of all of the Americas. We get to reflect in the situations where we get to walk in as professionals in our personal lives. But it takes courage to show up as yourself. And it takes courage to get feedback that may be uncomfortable. It takes courage to speak your mind. And equally, it takes courage to listen. A wise man seeks advice. One of my favorite proverbs. Courage is the realization of your fears Many are rooted in insecurity and jealousy. Many are a choice. You get to choose how you show up and if you're going to show up the way you truly want to show up. And I've had thousands and thousands of conversations with everyone. And the great majority of people just want to know. They want to understand better our systems of oppression, our institutional racism, systemic. Where does equity come in for people of color? They truly ask these questions because they don't know what they don't know. And then there's others that are okay with the feelings of supremacy, with the feelings of pride and ego as to them and us. And that's okay. They get to choose their own walk. They get to choose their journey. And we get to choose whether or not we want to walk with them or not. In our places of business, in our professional lives, when we go to the doctors, the hospitals, we get to set the stage and the expectation as to how you are going to interact with us. And you know how we get to do it? We get to do it in love. We get to do it in love because we know that hate is rooted in those fears. Hate. But love is peace and kindness and patience, right? Love. What is love? Love means a deeply committed and connectedness with someone. Fear. We already went through that. What is derived from fear, what we experience, why Martin Luther King did the arduous work that he did, knowingly doing this work that was going to cost him his life and many others before and after him. Racism can only manifest itself when we engage in it, when we invite it. And if it's something that is innate in you that you feel, because many times it is, then you get to decide how you're going to act on that. Racism has its origins in the ease with which we learn to fear people from different ethnic groups and different religious backgrounds and such. Many times this irrational fear shows up because they may have had a negative interaction with a person of color. And then all of a sudden, this whole group of people pays the price for that one person that they interacted with. However, if it happens within their own community, it's never looked at as a whole group of people, just this one person who committed this crime or upset me in such a way. And it's usually forgotten if it's from the same race. The premise of love and courage is what we get to have, what we get to create, what we get to grow. But we don't get to demand it. We get to learn how to share, we get to learn how to bond because it's intimate. And I think when Martin Luther King was talking about love, he was talking about how love drives out evil and hate. And love, the intimacy and the passion, it involves a protectiveness. I love that. I love that love means that you protect me. Love means that I'm safe. That's what love means. Love means that you're going to care for me. Love means that I can trust you. And I think as we're reflecting and reclaiming the legacy of MLK, we get to really notice, we get to discover, what does love mean to me? Is it internal? Is it an intellect type of understanding I have of love? If that's it, then we get to check in. We get to check in because we understand that without love, racism, and the disparities that it has created for people of color, Black and brown and indigenous people, have continuously killed us. It shuts us down. We have no voice. And it keeps us in a role of subjugation. It keeps us in a role of minority. And we know that's nonsense. We know that's not true because we're not the minority. If equity, and some people say equality, but I prefer equity, is something that you feel everyone gets to have, then I invite you to sit in the space with others that you may not have had an opportunity to, or may have never sat in the space of others to understand the depths of pain, of trauma that we've experienced. You get to understand that we're not aggressive, we're not loud, we're not crazy, we're not angry, we're passionate. We come from a collective, from a tribal way of living. And I'm generalizing because I know that things have changed a lot. But as for me in my household, that's how I was raised. Where if I need advice, I'm calling my uncle, my grandmother, my mother, my sister, my brother, my husband. I'm calling everyone because I get to have the best advice to move forward because I understand that my responsibility is not just of me. It is of we. It is a collective tribal response. So wherever I sit and wherever I go, I always remember my responsibility to others because it's not about me. It's about me having an opportunity because of my ancestors, because of those before me, because of Dr. Martin Luther King Jr., because of others. I have the opportunity today to advocate for equity in all these places, and you do too. When we think about the legacy of Martin Luther King, we think about the truth. The truth, there's only one truth. And the truth of the truth is that we get to care deeply for one another. We get to cure one another and heal one another. And in what ways do we get to do that? We get to do it in love. In love. And you can think that we're snowflakes. You can think that whatever you want to think, it's okay. However, we do know that responding to hate, to fear, to anxiety, to those who feel they're superior, we do get to speak to them in love, in patience, and kindness. We don't get to take it personal because we get to shift. We get to interrupt that narrative. And sometimes we're just afraid. We're just afraid that others will be better than us, that they're going to get that promotion that we think we deserve. And sometimes that Black, brown, person of color, indigenous person has that potential, has what they get to have to get that promotion. And not that they're better, but they're equally qualified. We get to say what we want to say. We get to be what we get to be. But we get to abide by love. Martin Luther King said in his sermon that perfect love casts out fear. We get to respond to others in creative ways, is what he said. Because sometimes those conversations will not benefit us. They won't. He said, don't respond to the trolls by trolling them. Don't react to jealousy with more jealousy. Face your fears with loving kindness and not through more negativity because it continues to perpetuate negativity. Dr. Martin Luther King, like I said, his faith was in the Christian God, the God of Israel. And many people have different types of faith. Some meditate, some believe in Buddha, some are atheists, some have different ways of being in connection with Creator, and that's fine. And some have nothing at all, and that's fine too. But whatever your faith is, that's where you get to get rooted. You get to get rooted, especially for a time like today, when we see all around us that not just our country, but our world is in crisis. We get to pray for those who pray, or meditate for those who meditate. or send good energy and vibes for those who send good energy and vibes, or think good thoughts and affirmations for those who think good thoughts of transformation. And because of the way of being is about a collective life and way of being of health, of love, of trust, of relationship building. Because of that, we can shift and develop new ways of being. And that is called hope. Hope. And I remember people used to come around and say, oh, girl, what's wrong with you? And I said, what do you mean, what's wrong with me? Because, you know, I love everybody. I hug everybody. I kiss everyone. We get to. I said, you're crazy because not everyone is like you. I was like, yeah, that's true. And you know what I said? So what? I get to be what I believe I get to be as a servant and my responsibility to others, as I believe my God of Israel has commanded me to. I get to be that way. And if that's crazy to love people, if that's crazy to forgive people, if that's crazy to extend my arm to someone who tried to chop it off the other day, if that's crazy, then I get to be crazy. I get to live as crazy in this world that is full of despair, in a world that is grieving. I get to share the hope that I have for others, the hope that I have for humanity, the hope that I get to see and that my children's children get to see. The hope that Martin Luther King used to say that will transform the world, that will take them from this despair and revive them with this breeze of hope. He said that the words of a motto that used to be on the walls of in generations before, in the homes of those who were devout, it says, fear knocked on the door. Faith answered, and there was no one there. Once we're able to do our work and to share our work, it is out of our control. We can't control interactions or narrative of others, but we can interrupt them when we are faced with them or we're having a conversation with others. We get to do that. If someone asks you a question, you get to answer it. If you're feeling uncomfortable and you're tired, say, hey, maybe later we can get together and talk about these things, because it's heavy. It's heavy. It's heavy. The antidote for fear is love. What will cure fear and hate is love. The only thing that can heal, the only thing that can shift folks into hope is love. We get to harness our energies and we get to pour the cups of others. We get to hold our torches up high and we get to light other torches along the way. We get to work on eliminating racism, and we can. We can eliminate hate, we can. And in the times that we're processing this, we get to learn the ability to endure them at the same time, because this is not an easy road. But has it been? It's never been easy. My question to you is, do you choose to live in fear? Or do you choose that wonderful medicine that counteracts hate and racism and fear, which is love and hope and kindness? Martin Luther King said, we can never be satisfied as long as the Negro is the victim of the unspeakable horrors of police brutality. So we're talking about over 60, 70 years ago, he was writing this. It still resonates today. Every second, every minute of our day, it still resonates. Martin Luther King said, America is sick. And unless America has a revolution of values, there will be more counter-revolutionary wars. unless it puts people over profit and peace over war. Martin Luther King Jr. said, a nation that continues year after year to spend more money on military defense than on programs of social uplift is approaching spiritual death. And as I look around at our communities, as I look around at our nation, and even across the world, there is a lot of spiritual death. But, or I should say, and, there is great hope and renewal of love and connection with one another because of these times. I've seen so many people connect to God of Israel, to Creator, to Yahweh, to meditation, to peace in this last year than I've ever seen in my lifetime. That gives me hope. That gives me hope for another day. That gives me hope that white moderates will take a stand. And I did this quote earlier because it's so important. And I want to leave you all with this because we have a responsibility to one another. We get to show up for one another. Martin Luther King said, I must confess that over the past few years, I had been gravely disappointed with the white moderates. I've also reached the regrettable conclusion that the Negro's great stumbling block in his stride towards freedom is not the white citizen councilor or the Ku Klux Klaner, but the white moderate, who is more devoted to order than to justice, who prefers a negative peace, which is the absence of tension, to a positive peace, which is the presence of justice. I love that quote because we don't get to avoid what's uncomfortable. We don't get to avoid what doesn't feel good. We get to confront it. We get to be courageous. We get to embrace it. We get to endure, and we get to shift and pour into that cup love. Love, love. That's what we get to do. I just want to say thank you for this time that we get to share. And because of love and faith, our children get to dream of that tomorrow as well. And I've shared about the times that fear has overtaken me, which is a rational fear from my children when they were out or pulled over by the police for no reason, aside from being Black or brown. But I also share with you that last week, my 8-year-old said to me, Mom, he said, on August 23rd, that was his date. He said, Black, brown, people of color, indigenous people will be all walking down the street. I said, really? I said, what do you mean? He said, Mom, they're going to be able just to walk. And what I understood was that we can come and walk in groups and crowds down the street without being killed, without being treated with hostility or as a threat, that we get to have equity in just walking down the street. And if my 8-year-old can have that hope for tomorrow, he gave me a date too. If he gets to have that, that means that we're doing something right. Because he doesn't get to live in an America with irrational fears, with racism, with oppression and subjugation. He doesn't get that. He gets to live in the America, in the United States that Martin Luther King spoke about. And that's what we get to remember today, is that we get to live in love, in commitment to one another, in connectedness with one another, but more so in protection of one another. We get to do that. I just want to thank you for this time. Thank you for listening. And if you have any questions, feel free to ask. And with that, I'm complete. And I say thank you. Thank you. And please remember your responsibility to one another.
Hello, I'm Steve DiNatale, the mayor of the city of Fitchburg. I'm happy to join you today to pay our respects to a remarkable civic leader, Dr. Martin Luther King Jr. 2020 brought a great deal of inequities to the forefront of our national and local conversations. One such conversation brought about by centuries of mistreatment and misguided laws. In the wake of the killing of George Floyd, 1,000 demonstrators marched toward Fitchburg City Hall. I'm proud of our community for hosting this event. I'm proud of the many organizers and sponsors who spoke, and I'm proud of our Fitchburg Police Department who joined the event. We as the city of Fitchburg, through people like Melanie Kirklandall, who for several years has organized the Juneteenth celebration at Riverfront Park, and Theo Demosthenes, who made certain Juneteenth was virtual this year. As I said then, and I will say now, Fitchburg is a city of one love, one family, and one community. This summer, the Fitchburg School District conducted an internal equity audit to address racial inequity in our school system. This was a comprehensive and inclusive look inward at our public schools. While we are still digesting this information, we are creating action steps moving us ever closer to inclusivity, belonging, diversity, and equality in our schools. This fall, I appointed my new Chief of Staff, Patrick Hare. Mr. Hare chaired the Diversity and Inclusion Advisory Committee for the City of Worcester, where he helped to update the city's affirmative action policy and plan, items I have tasked him with reviewing for the City of Fitchburg. In 2021, my team and I are committed to working towards diversity and inclusion at every level. We will develop and publish a new diversity and inclusion webpage, create a diversity and inclusion advisory committee, update our affirmative action policy, and we will conduct several trainings for our employees. The City of Fitchburg will also continue to work with our Human Rights Commission to have ongoing conversations with our community and engage our residents on such an important issue. Along with the Fitchburg Chief of Police, we will continue to advance our teachings of fair and impartial policing and provide a bias-free response to all those we serve.
Hi everyone, my name is Michael Kushmerek. It's my honor to participate in today's program. This past year as a Fitchburg City Councilor, I was honored to introduce and sponsor a petition that looked to tackle systemic inequities, to reduce the disparities in economic empowerment and racial equity within the city of Fitchburg through the lens of city's hiring practices, appointing, interning practices, as well as how we allocate and use resources and personnel throughout the city to tackle those disparities. And in the year ahead, as a state representative for the 3rd Worcester District, I look forward to taking that same approach and using that same lens at the state level. How can we ensure that the workforce of the Commonwealth is reflective of the rich and diverse tapestry of North Central Massachusetts, as well as the entire Commonwealth? I look forward to working with each and every one of you to help to accomplish a more diverse and inclusive and prosperous Commonwealth of Massachusetts. Thank you, and happy Martin Luther King Jr. Day.
Hi, I'm State Senator Jamie Eldridge. I want to thank Lynn Faust, head of the Marlborough Community Development Corporation, for asking me to say a few words for the Montachusett Coalition Martin Luther King Jr. Celebration and commemoration. And the question is, what is my antidote to fear? And the simple answer is, the antidote is hope, but it's really not just hope. It's about hope in action. And so I think that in light of the just overwhelming racial justice protests that began this past June, that there's just been an incredible amount of energy and advocacy directed at all elected officials, federal, state, and local, to take action to address, racial injustice. So I'm committed in the new year to continue the work and build upon what the legislature has done. But it's really about taking that hope, taking those ideas, and taking it into action. It's not enough just to put a sign in front of your yard. It's not enough just to make a statement, but it's about what action are you taking in your community if you have a position of power, or if you're an elected, what are you doing to address racial discrimination at any level, to encourage diversity in your community, where you work, your place of worship? So it's really about taking that action. So thank you so much for this event. Obviously, it's a virtual event, but I hope we can all soon, sometime in the new year. Thanks so much.
Hello, Montachusett MLK Coalition, and congratulations on another year. My name is Alexis Walls, and I work with the Massachusetts Public Health Association, which, for those who don't know, is a statewide policy advocacy organization. We work in policy areas like affordable housing, equitable transportation, and access to healthy and affordable food. Many of you may be familiar with my dynamic colleague, Andrea Freeman, who, prior to her recent promotion at MPHA, did a lot of work to support community partners, work that I've since taken on. We were asked the question, how does MPHA plan to address racial justice in 2021? And while that's a really big question to answer, I'm going to talk about just one of the ways that we plan to do that, which is through our principle of listening to communities most impacted. In order to advance racial justice, it's really important that we change our systems so that power in who has the ability to shape policy decisions is redistributed and shared equitably, particularly among communities of color. And we at MPHA plan to do our part to redistribute power by strengthening our commitment to listening to and following the leadership of communities that have experienced a disproportionate burden of poor outcomes due to racist and other unjust policies. Some of the ways that we plan to put this principle of listening to those most impacted in practice are, one, to just be more intentional about how we are building that listening process into our own decision-making processes. Two is by working with other statewide policy organizations and policymakers to hold each other accountable to listening to those most impacted, and to being more intentional about thinking through unintended consequences that a policy decision may have. And third, but not least, is that we want to do work to support grassroots and people of color-led groups that seek to be effective in making change locally. We want to be a resource to you in the Montachusett region, and we can provide support in several different ways, whether that be through sharing information, through supporting strategy development, or through thinking about process issues like whether the right people are at the table in your coalition. We look forward to supporting your change work in 2021 and are really excited to be able to celebrate with you all today. Have a happy new year.
trouble anyway. We should never be discouraged. Take it to the Lord in prayer. I wanna know, can we find a friend so faithful, who will all our sorrow share?
And Jesus knows our every weakness. Oh, take it to the Lord in prayer. Oh, what peace we often find.
Oh, what needless pains we bear, and it's all because we do not carry everything to God in prayer. Everything to God in prayer.
First, thank you to the Montachusett MLK Coalition for inviting me to be a part of the 22nd Annual Reverend Dr. Martin Luther King Jr. celebration, and for continuing to find ways for us to be together in spite of the challenges of COVID-19. When Mark told me the theme this year would be Dr. King's sermon, Antidotes for Fear, I knew this would, like always, be the kind of conversation we needed for everything in our community and our country is facing right now. Dr. King discusses two types of fear, stating, normal fear protects us. Abnormal fear paralyzes us. Normal fear motivates us to improve our individual and collective welfare. Abnormal fear constantly poisons and distorts our inner lives. Our problem is not to be rid of fear, but rather to harness and master it. And then continues to provide for antidotes, acknowledgement, and awareness, courage, love, and faith. And I believe in Dr. King's teachings more than ever, hate is rooted in fear. And the only cure for fear, hate is love. But I don't know about you. With the siege on our U.S. Capitol last week, and as we round the corner of nearly a year of battling COVID-19, with so many of our community members still not believing the seriousness of the virus or the truth of our elections, my faith has been tested. I wish I had more uplifting remarks today, but I know that the hardest weeks and months are ahead of us. And I'm thankful to all of you who are joining in this discussion today to lift up Dr. King's legacy and have these tough and necessary conversations and continue them into our own social circles. Thank you for your time.
And with that, I think we're good to go. All right. So thank you again to the virtual choir, to those politicians and local community activists and leaders for their words. And now we're going to be starting our panel discussion. Again, our theme is the antidote for fear, and it's based off of Dr. Martin Luther King's sermon, Antidotes for Fear. Before we get into it, I want to introduce our lovely panelists. And we will start with Maria Milagros Vasquez. She's an award-winning speaker, award-nominated author, TEDx speaker, storyteller, and empowerment life coach. Whether sharing her life experiences or knowledge through impactful talks, workshops, leadership training, life coaching, or videos, Maria uses stories to bring about encouragement, education, and love to empower others to get out of their way and break free from hindering thoughts or beliefs so that they can live amazing lives and leave their unique and positive mark on the world. She knows that no matter where you come from and what you've been through or what you have done, a positive perspective, love, and personal responsibility can change every area of your life. She knows because it worked for her, and she's not an exception to the rule. Welcome, Maria. Our next panelist is Charmise Gunn. She is an academic advisor for the Gateway to College program and an adjunct faculty member at Montachusett Community College. She is the creator of the nationally recognized Tea Time Speaker Series, chair of the Diversity, Equity, and Inclusion team at Montachusett Community College, who just opened up a center earlier today, and a TRIO alumna. In addition to serving as the chair of the Ethnic Minority Affairs Committee for the Massachusetts Teacher Association, Charmise is a member of the NAACP, vice president and executive board member for the Three Parodids Minority Coalition in North Central Massachusetts, and a member of the board of directors for the Massachusetts Educational Opportunity Association. Welcome, Charmise. Next up is William Cortezia. He is a Brazilian pedagogue and tenured faculty member of the School of Education at Fitchburg State University and the University Academic Liaison for the North of Maine Project. Dr. Cortezia is a speaker in college access and success, community outreach, and pedagogy for educators working with underserved, underprepared students and students at risk of dropping out of school. He works with higher education institutions, K-12 schools, and nonprofit organizations, helping them further develop and evolve their work with students and communities. His teaching method courses include a focus on social stratification, sociology of education, and critical pedagogy and teaching. Dr. Cortezia's most recent research explores public school education and the pedagogy of a culture of excellence, Sapientia, Virtus, and Amicitia, the plight of male students of color, quantitative indicators of enrollment and resentment, and the significance of a culturally relevant pedagogy, the sociology of critical education in middle school. Welcome, Professor Cortezia. And finally, we have David Demosthenes. He's a Fitchburg State graduate with a degree in history and a minor in political science and music. He works at Suffolk University at the Division of Student Success, where he is now pursuing a master's degree in public administration. In his free time, he likes to read, travel when COVID settles down, and play his guitar and saxophone. And I can personally attest to that because he also happens to be my brother. Welcome, David. Now, again, the theme for our panel is the antidote for fear. And again, it's based off of Dr. Martin Luther King's sermon, and The Antidote for Fear. In his sermon, he alludes that war and conflict isn't started usually because of hatred, but because of fear. Fear leads to hatred, and hatred leads to conflict, and conflict leads to deeper hatred. So our first question, which is going to be fielded to Charmise and to Will. In your opinion, what have been some of the fears that have led to some of the conflicts that we've seen in 2020 over racial justice? Now, we've seen, again, plenty of conflicts, whether it was marches, and we definitely saw another conflict not too long ago. So what do you think have been some of the fears that have led to these conflicts? We'll start with Charmise.
Thank you. Let me just pull up my notes. Thank you for having me on this panel and to be a part of this event today. So definitely want to just, shout out to everyone here. So first question. And so fear, when we talk about fear, and again, everything today is solely my opinion. The fear of losing power. I think right now, we are in a time where there's a lot of questioning, there's a lot of wait a minute, what's going on? And again, this is just my perspective. I feel like there is a lot of fear of losing power, like the fear of oppression. The fear of Black Lives Matter. The fear of dying. The fear of being a victim. When Dr. King, we're still fighting for the same fight. And that's a fear. Like the fear of non-progression. The fear that although it is 2021, many of us are still, the fear of, still being in the 1920s, the 1930s, the 1800s. The fear of questioning authority, the fear of what has been taught to us. We're still fighting the same fight. And so when we see the many different conflicts, riots, we have social media. So now we've been talking about this for years, decades, centuries. Now you're able to see it. And that feel of realization, that's real. Also having the fear of injustices be blatant. You can't turn away from it. There's been many different things that we've seen. The fear of the uprising. So I just wanted to throw that out there. I don't want to, take too much time. But sometimes the way that I am, I like to throw my thoughts out there to get that perspective.
That was great, and I resonated with a lot of what you said. You hit the nails, a lot of nails on a lot of heads. William, what would you like to add?
First of all, thank you for having me on this wonderful panel. I'd like to just literally piggyback on what Ms. Gunn was saying. We fear the unknown. We fear the other. There's us and the other. And I think that one of the worst, and again, I'm guilty because, it's not only my opinion, but my professional background is sociology of education. The fear of not knowing, people will concentrate on that. And I think it's even worse because there's one thing worse than ignorance, as in not knowing, is the miseducation. We've all been educated. It doesn't mean we've been educated with the social truth. So it's like Ms. Gunn was saying, I have power. I have fear of losing power to those people. Well, who are those people? I don't know, but I heard that, but they said that. And, you start seeing all the fake news and all these incredible ideas, and then you see last Wednesday things happening, and you go, how can that happen? Well, it's simple. It's if you repeat something long enough and people are misguided, it'll become the truth with a capital T, unquestionable. And it can be the most, ridiculous thing about it. So just wrapping up, I think it's fear of the other. If I don't know who the other, first of all, creating the other, that's an issue. Instead of I or the other, it's us. But if we create the other, and then under miseducation, we reinforce the other as being our enemy, right? The very traditional haves and have-nots. I have, and if you don't have, then you want to have what I have, meaning you're going to have to take it from me, versus there's enough to go around. But bottom line, I think that the biggest thing that I got from 2020 was the fear of I don't know, or the miseducation of it.
Very well said. Very well said. And as you know, fake news and alternative facts can be great sources of misinformation and miseducation. All right. Our next question is fielded to Maria Vasquez and David. In your opinion, based on those fears, especially the fear of the other and the miseducation of that, that adds to that fear, what would be the antidote to those particular fears? Let's start with Maria.
Thank you. Thank you guys so much for having me on this panel. And I'm going to kind of parrot what Sharmi said. These are my opinions and my perspective, and we're open to evolving and changing, right? So this makes me think of the quote from Dr. King, and I might be misquoting it, like I don't have it memorized, but it was something along the lines of, men hate each other because they fear each other. They fear each other because they don't know each other. They don't know each other because they don't communicate, and they don't communicate because they're separated. So when I think about this idea of us being separate and being afraid to even have hard conversations, right? And so one of the things that I think of as an antidote is really being intentional about diversifying our lives, right? We have to be intentional about making sure that we're having conversations that are hard. We have to get comfortable being uncomfortable, right? And then that's where we're able to unpack all of this miseducation that we've received and hear real stories, real testimonies of real people. And then that's when people go, oh my gosh, I had no idea this was happening, because it wasn't on their doorstep, right? And the reality is, if they don't live it, they don't necessarily know that it's happening. They see it on TV and they're trying to pretend like that's not really real, because I don't know anybody who's experienced that. But if we're communicating, if we're not separated, if we're diversifying our lives, if we're having real hard conversations, then it forces people, like there are white people in my life who are finally going, oh my gosh, I'm so sorry, I had no idea. And I'm like, but dude, I told you so many times, right? And then they go, yeah, but now I'm seeing it for real, right? And it's like, okay, part of it too was my not wanting to hinder them with my stories, because I was taught, you don't talk about it. You don't talk about it, it could get you fired. You don't talk about it, it can get you arrested. You don't talk about it, it can get you in trouble, right? Act a certain way, be a certain way, share certain stories. So that was also part of my, like what I've done to almost contribute to the scaffolding, is I have to recognize that I was also placating, right? Their fragility is also partly our responsibility, because we tiptoe around them, right? Acting like they're not capable and they're too sensitive. Well, welcome to the new era. It's time to have some hard conversations. You're not a baby, right? Speaking of babies, if a baby falls down, most of the time we go, you okay? Get up, keep playing. And they do. We have not been doing that. We have been going, oh my gosh, you poor thing, let me coddle you. I have been taught throughout my life to coddle you because you're not strong enough to hear and handle our stories and our realities. Well, this is the time. Right? So we educate each other, we share our stories, we show up, we take action, we take action, we take action. We do it rooted in love, of course, but we take action, right? And we do that from a place of being willing to put ourselves in an uncomfortable space. So for me, that would be the antidotes to dealing with all of those fears. David.
Again, thank you for having me. And again, it's always a pleasure to hear Maria given in her perspective. It's always a pleasure to go into it. So to follow up with that as well, I do believe that since Martin Luther King was a minister, I'll kind of start with this as well. It's quoted in the book of Mark chapter 12, love your neighbor. And that's something that Maria mentioned as well. Make sure we're taking action, but it's rooted in love. And as we continue to bring our reality to the forefront, that people are now seeing the lives that we're living, for those that have those fears, the fears that in both communities, I think the big thing is just identifying what's at stake, and identifying the beast that people are afraid of. A lot of people, they're afraid of losing their way of life. And for others, it's losing our actual lives. And being able to identify the beast. So to be able to see, like, what is it that I'm exactly afraid of? And once you're able to identify it, find out what's at stake for you and for others. If it's a way of life, then it's something that could possibly be negotiated. And once you're able to find those bottom lines, you're able to kind of start to administer the effective antidote, whatever those particular fears that were mentioned earlier by the other panelists. And once you're able to exactly see what you're fighting against the fear, you're fighting against people losing the way of life. Once you identify that, then we can go in almost with like a surgical precision to administer an antidote to that. And once you do that as well, you need to have a resilience in it as well. So that way we're We're tackling it. We're facing down the reality of the scenario. You can't have resilience if we're misguided, if we're delusional. And we need to face down that reality, be able to find the meaning, find the value in what we're going through. That way, it's not something that just happens and is just filed away on the shelf. That way, another generation can go through the exact same problem. We identify the values of our situation. And once we identify those values, it goes along with identifying what we're afraid of losing, identifying the stakes to face those fears. And once we have that as well, we identify all those proper measures, we can adapt and we can be flexible. That way we can make sure we're tackling the right things. And we're not attacking people, we're attacking problems. And making sure we're cutting out those people that are more prone or those that insist on causing those certain problems. So identifying what's in front of us. So that way we can, it's not just a mysterious, homogeneous fear where it's just a nebulous thing like a big, scary word called racism. We need to know exactly what we're fighting, what it looks like, and then be resilient as we administer those antidotes to those fears.
Big words like homologous, nebulous, all that. That was great. That was great. Also, I loved how you put it, the example where you said, like, you can't, like doctors, you can't fix what's wrong with somebody until they give you the diagnosis, until they figure out what is wrong. You can't administer that antidote to fear, to address those fears, if you don't know what those fears are really about. Great points, everyone. All right, question number 3. And this is going to be fielded to Charmise and Maria. How has the pandemic exposed some of the racial injustices in America in terms of economics, healthcare, and education, or in any other way that you have noticed? Who would like to go? There we go. Charmise, you're up.
Yeah, I don't mind going first. So, a whole bunch of different things, right? So where can we start? And so as far as economics, we know that those who are essential workers are BIPOC. And so when I mention BIPOC, it's Black, Indigenous, people of color, Latinx, Latinos. But we know that, right? So we know that those are our essential workers, and really understanding that in certain communities, particularly in those communities, never been able to take time off. And these were conversations that, we've had before the pandemic. Now, if you want to talk about right now, I'm just talking about the COVID situation, where certain communities, we don't take time off. If you're sick, you still continue to go to work, right? If you're in the hospital and if it's not overnight, you still go to your shift afterwards. And so we can't afford to take time off. Many of us, frontline essential workers, they just voted in sick time not too long ago, right? So when we really want to talk about some of the issues about what it exposed, not everyone had sick time. Not everyone has the luxury to take 14 days off and quarantine into your house. That's not true for many African-American, Latinx, Indigenous. That's not true. Our Asian members, many of us couldn't even afford it. So that was one, right? To have that luxury to take a day off or work off because you're sick. So that's one. Another one is the healthcare. And again, these are issues that you definitely got to educate yourself, because many of these are not new. And if you don't know, then I will gladly remind you that there's been disparities in the healthcare system. Today, right now, there's been disparities for years, for decades. When we want to talk about Black pain, when we mention that when we go into the hospital to say that we are in pain, that is often, they don't believe us when we're in pain. It's not taken seriously. You can look at Serena Williams. Now, as much of a first-class, high-profile athlete that Serena Williams has the money, and she had mentioned when she was delivering her daughter, she had told the doctor, something's not right. And she had to keep mentioning it until, and don't quote me on this, someone else had stepped in and said, you know what? You're right. We had to do something about the pain because she could have died. So someone like Serena Williams with all that money is mentioning and highlighting, hey, wait a minute, this Black pain is real. We can talk about the syphilis experiment. We can talk about so many different things where many communities, particularly the African American community, there's a distrust in the healthcare system, absolutely. And we've seen it. It was exposed in COVID. Okay.
Agreed. There's so many stories, so many things. Maria, anything you would like to add?
Now my volume is going. And I'll be quick about the other one with education.
Mm-hmm.
With education, as Will had mentioned, it's the curriculum. Where we are part of that problem, right? Being an educator, we are reteaching that same curriculum. We can deviate a little bit, but we are part of. How do we decolonize the curriculum? How do we bring in more educators of color, more indigenous educators, and also our leadership? When we look at the education system, we are not even representing nor reflecting our student populations that we serve. Mm-hmm. And then the last one I'm going to mention is law enforcement. And so that was another one that was exposed. But again, for many communities, this is just the conversations that we've been having for years. And so when you want to talk about the law enforcement and policing, this is where the quote, defunding the police, this is what it means, defunding the police. And so immediately people say, oh my God. But what that really means is to reallocate money for services, the reallocation of funds. Mm-hmm. That does not mean that people are anti-police, because we do need the police in our communities. And not all cops are bad cops. However, it's the funding. So do we have after-school programs? Do we have training programs? Do we have mental health services? Why should someone have to be in the system in order to get services, in order to get funding, in order to get job training? And so those are the couple of things that I had wanted to mention.
You hit a lot of nails. Again, on the head. You're like 10 for 10 right now. I love it. I love it. Maria, what would you like to add?
So you're right. She did hit a lot of the nails. And as she's hitting them, I'm looking through my list like done. So thank you for that, Charmise. One of the other things that I did want to mention is economically, I think something that has really come to the surface is exploitation of Black and brown people, right? And when we really think about it, this country was built on the Blacks and with the blood of Black and brown bodies. And so there's this pattern that seems to still exist, and we know it, but it's starting to finally come to the forefront. Again, like she mentioned, thanks to social media and thanks to the news. I mean, not all the news, but, you know, thanks to social media and people capturing these things and putting them forward. And we're starting to see, oh, I know this service and or I know this product because I know this Black woman who created it why is it over here being used, appropriation for these different, so we're starting to see it now more and more. When it comes to healthcare, during the pandemic, I had a conversation with a white doctor, and I was asking him questions about, does he think that he has a bias towards, brown and black bodies? And his response, no lie, was, well, black people are just tougher. That's what he said. Yep. So there's this, I picked my face up off the floor and then proceeded to educate him and said, there is this real education that has continued since slavery, saying they're faking, push them back out on the fields, keep working them to the grind. And we're being taught and retaught and retaught that. And you, doctor, with the medical degree and the oath to protect, have decided that that is a truth. So when white people come in, you appease the white fragility, you give them all the services, you find out what they need. And when black people come in, you're like, here's some Advil, go home, right? So it's part of the reason why brown and black people are dying from things that we have cures for, right? Mm-hmm. And so really having this consistent awareness. And so when we had that conversation, he goes, oh my God, really? Yes. So one person, one day at a time. That's my mantra. I just have to keep reminding myself, one person, one day at a time. Right? That's all we can do. And then during the pandemic as well, I noticed through the work that I do at the Mount, there was so many kids who didn't have access to a laptop or internet, right? Inner city school kids just don't have the access because the funding is not there. You know what there is funding for? Lots of police. There's funding for, setting up squad cars everywhere. There's funding to catch them being bad, but there's no funding to help them be good, whatever that means, and I have my own ideas about what good and bad means, but you get where I'm going. When I have a coaching client and she's in a very well-to-do suburban neighborhood, the day that the pandemic hit and they shut the schools, they drove around and dropped off laptops to everybody's front porch. Right. And it was like, there are literally two different worlds that are happening here. And so this stuff, again, is being brought to the forefront. And teachers who before that I've had conversations with who say, well, I don't understand why their parents can't just get it together. It gave them a real revelation that it's not about getting it together. It's that the funding, the sources, the necessary tools literally are not available for these students, right? So it does create these huge disparities in education for our youth. So those are some of the touch points. And I love what she brought up about, she touched on defund the police, because again, it's not take away the police altogether. It's why don't we take some of those millions of dollars and push them into places where services are needed so that we can cut that school to prison pipeline, right? So we can slice that bad boy in half and start making sure that these kids end up going to college or into the workforce rather than headed to the prisons.
Exactly. And I'm gonna touch a couple of those things real quick before we move on. First of all, that quote, amazing. There's a lot of funding for them to catch them when they're bad, but there's not enough funding to help them be good. If you couldn't, that is the most simplistic terms. I love it. I love it. Yes. And the other thing that you said about, I already lost it. But with police brutality, not just police brutality, but with defunding the police. A lot of times people call police for domestic issues, for mental health issues and all this stuff like that, things that they're not trained or equipped to do. You need a mental health specialist to help somebody with a mental health problem. You need a therapist who works with domestic abuse victims to help a domestic dispute. You can't have, and they talked during the National Night Out, they talked about the guardian versus warrior mindset. And sometimes our cops are easily locked into warrior mode because, protect and serve, and stuff like that. And so those funds that we talk about defunding them, those go into those services. So the police don't have to be mental health therapists counselors or therapists and do all that stuff that they're not fully equipped to do. Or that money can go into funding trainings for those police officers so that they can be better equipped to handle those types of situations.
And I just want to say too that all of those components are really intertwined, because if you have someone who has medical and mental health issues that aren't being addressed at the hospitals for whatever reason, it creates real in how they think and how they function. So then they act out. So then someone calls the police, and then it seems like they're just being a bad human. But when in fact they're in physical and mental pain, they don't know how else to do it. They face police brutality, and then it becomes this they end up in prison. They're still not getting their needs met, and it's goes. Yeah, it's all, and like Dr. King had talked about, we can't fix one piece of the problem unless we address the whole problem, right?
Yep.
All the components and the pieces, because they're all intertwined.
Yeah, and I like how you said that, because that was actually my last point before I moved on really quickly about how the racial injustices in economics, healthcare, and education, they're all intertwined as well. They're all intertwined as well, and so it's just like you said, it's a cycle of just setting people of color, brown and black folk back. Moving on. Quick question, at least we can get to this really quickly. David and Will, how can some of those or all of those injustices be addressed in 2021? All right, looks like David's going first.
Awesome. So I think in 2021 that we have a lot to look forward to, and we also have a lot to do. As always, there has always been a lot to do, but even now, I think, especially since there's such a movement towards, and there's the eyes of the world have been on us for a while, but even more so, there's been a lot of exposure. So I think there's three major kind of parts to it in terms of building on this progress. I think a big portion of addressing these issues still needs to be a people's movement. It needs to be the people of America being able to look at what they have and being able to address it. But those who want to be change makers, to be able to stand up and to understand, again, as we heard from a keynote speaker, it can't just be passed on to the next person. This is something that we need to actively move for. This is something that we need to actively fight for. So this needs to be pretty much a baseline understanding of what's okay and what's not okay. Everyone knows it's not okay to just walk up and commit murder on the street and walk away, because there's a baseline knowledge of that. There needs to be a baseline knowledge of being able to interrupt racism as we see it in person, no matter what form it comes as. There needs to be a movement of everyone to understand that this is not okay. So this needs to be a people's movement. There needs to be for the change makers, for the people that are sitting at home, for the people that are actually going out and trying to do things, business leaders, other advocates, politicians. This needs to be a movement of the entire United States. On top of that as well, for those who tend to be fear mongers, people who kind of fell victim to that fear as well. Again, there needs to be surgical precision in addressing that. Oftentimes fear, it doesn't always have a logical or rational understanding. Like there was a survey I read the other day that there's a large portion of Americans that have a valid fear of zombies, which not rational at all, but it's something they're afraid of. And again, but there's trainings to go against fear, and there's knowledge that goes against it as well. So being able to attack that, again, the same way in a clinical way, being able to go in and address what exactly people are feeling. If it's a fear, if there's a proximate danger to them that they're afraid of something, or if it's just a baseline anxiety where there's no fear, but they're just living in a heightened sense because of a what if that may or may not happen. Being able to address that and analyze and say, this is what you're feeling, and this is how you can prepare for it. This is how you can address it, and being able to understand the reality of the scenario. And for those that, again, that are pretty much being fear mongers who are pushing that out, being able to, again, interrupt that process and say, this is not how we're going to do it. Again, establishing that baseline movement by the people, and then addressing those that are pushing fear and those that are the victims of the fear. And then the last part really quickly is for those who are kind of in the management roles of America at this point. So this is like the middle managers, the street level managers, or those we've made our advocates, elected officials and representatives. They need to be able to take risks on this matter. They need to be able to make decisive decisions on this matter. And again, it's not going to be, that was my timer. It's not going to be a perfect way forward, because this has been a matter that we've been dealing with for centuries. But being able to say, this is something I recognize as a problem, let's move forward in it. The same way if there was a crisis on oil, being able to experiment with different things to see how we can move forward. Our values, our lives needs to be held at the same commodity level as what makes America run. And being able to, again, be able to make mistakes and take the L, being able to say, hey, you know what, I made a mistake. Be willing to hear correction, to take criticism and feedback, because it's not an issue that oftentimes people are going to get right, especially if we have those who are in management positions who do not represent us physically or in other mindsets. If they don't represent us, they're more inclined sometimes to make mistakes when we give them our concerns, give them our trust. But being able to take that L and say, you know what, this is something I may not get perfect, but I'm willing to invite you onto the ride as well, and really promote cultural competency, promote community competency. So that way we're able to address the issues all together.
There's so much I want to add on to that, but I don't have time. William, go ahead.
Just, reinforcing what was said, without a doubt, identifying these issues, right? As all the panelists have said in some way, shape, or form, this is nothing new. And that's something that calls my attention. Regardless of what political party you might follow, it's this idea that 2021, in 2021, we have a new administration. We have everything's going to be fixed. COVID is going to go away. Racism is going to be fixed because it was invented in the last 4 years.
Oh, yeah, of course.
And that's the thing that really concerns me. As I mentioned in my biography, I am proud, to say that I arrived in this country 27 years ago, and I became a resident and a national, a proud American 26 years, so a year after. But I hear a lot of America is divided. It is now time to come together. And as much as I love this country and served this country, when were we united? When was this? Oh, we were united and then something horrible happened and now we're separate. So we need to go back to where we were. That's the first point. The second point, mentioning serving, as a former shore patrolman, that was my job in the Navy, was policing. It's that if you create that the other is the enemy, that those people are aggressive, even more tolerable to pain.
Mm-hmm.
And you are the unknown, and there's the unknown, then there is the fear. Then why am I going to negotiate with my enemy? Why am I going to learn something about this enemy? Because I'm a warrior. I'm not a negotiator. I'm not an ambassador for. And at the end of the day, we both want to go home the same way. We both have families. We both eat. Ms. Vasquez mentioned something about, educating one at a time. And, as a former middle school teacher, I used to have that quote in my class, and we used to joke around, and every time, I used to teach history, and class used to start, and we would all joke in and start like this, and right in, and every class would have a name, and they would be, the Phoenixes or something. And I actually made bumper stickers for them so they could put it in wherever they wanted. And if they were the Phoenix, Mr. C's 8th grade history class, it would say, the Phoenixes, educating one American at a time. And that's what we have to do. And educate is not, I know, you don't, so listen to what I have to say. Is let's talk. And I used to do that, when I taught in Miami, when I taught in Detroit, when I taught in New York City. It was sit down and say something as simple as talk. Do you have a mother? Well, yeah, of course I have a mother. Do you have a mother? Yeah, well, you both have mothers. Go. Do you like eating? Do you eat food? I don't care what type of food. Do you eat food? Solids. Yeah, do you do that too? Talk amongst yourself. Eventually, you're going to have something in common. And slowly but surely, that other disappear. And it's not to lose our identity. Be proud of who we are. And the issue here is it's not differentiation. That's the beauty about humanity. We're all different. It's the stratification. It's because you're different, then one has to be superior to the other, and the other one has to be inferior. Versus we can be very different, be extremely proud of our heritage and our ethnicity, but understand that racially speaking, we're one. It's not the black race, the white race, the yellow race, it's the human race. Now, ethnically speaking, it's cultural, it's beautiful, we're diverse, and that's wonderful. And this is not a utopic thing. This is not an academic thing. That's a human thing that we need to finally identify what we've already talked about and now go out there and negotiate.
Yeah, all great points, all great points. Like you said, when was America ever really united? And honestly, to have those talks, in order to have to have those negotiations, we got to be honest with ourselves and honest with the history of this nation and honest about the state of how things really are. And in order to get to that diagnosis, you can't lie to your doctor. I got a headache. Well, why do you have a headache? I slipped and fell. No, like you can't lie to your doctor. Otherwise, you can't accurately give a diagnosis and accurately address the problem, and accurately administer the antidote to the problem. And it also requires accountability. We can give you an antidote all you want, but if you don't take it, where does that leave us? We have to be accountable. We have to hold others accountable, black, white, no matter what your color is. If you want this to change, it is on you. Like you said, it's a people's movement. We got to hold each other and hold ourselves accountable, not to just make hashtag Black Lives Matter a trend, not to just, now that Biden's, sorry, I'm not supposed to get political, but now that we're getting a new administration, things are going to be fixed. COVID's gone, racism is gone, division is gone. No. We got to be accountable to ourselves and hold other people accountable and hold others accountable. All right, last two questions. Lightning round is going to be really quick. Open to everybody. Everyone is talking about how America is entering a new normal. Things are, because of COVID, it's exposed a lot of things about America, and not just in the sense of racial justice, but just everything in general, like wearing masks, social distancing, virtual learning, working from home, all that stuff. What are some of the hopes that you have for 2021 in this new normal? It's open to anybody. All right. David.
Oh, sorry.
I'll just say something really quick. So one thing I want to, some hopes I have coming for this year too, is for people to settle for peace and not quiet.
Would you like to elaborate?
No, I'm tempted to leave it just at that. But yes, being able to seek true peace and justice and not just a status quo. Oftentimes people, when they have something, they try to maintain it, they just babysit it, they don't grow it. And you can't always babysit these type of issues. They need to be active growth. Sometimes it's not quiet, but being able to seek that peace and instead of just a status quo.
So deep. I love it. William, I think you had your hand up.
I'd like to add awareness of oneself, awareness of the group, the collective, the individual, awareness of what is going on. Educate others, but educate ourselves too. This is a moment of awareness. This is a moment that, we shouldn't be fighting for equity. We should be fighting for equality. It's something I've been saying that to my students from middle school all the way to doctoral level. Equity is the right, you oppress me, I want the right to oppress you. I want to have the same power. Equality is, why do we have to do that? Why can we not communicate? And that's what sometimes people get confused with, that equity, right? Sometimes you might need more or less than the other. There's that power structure as well that we need to be aware of, the power structure.
Ladies.
Yep. So I think what I hope the administration upholds its promises of the new normal is, I hope they do uphold their promises. As Will had mentioned, education, right? More funding for public education, particularly when you look at the community college. The community college is one of the most diverse, right? And so just at the community college alone, we serve high school students, we service adults, ELL students, international, first generation, low income parents, students with disabilities, and even those who are incarcerated. And so we are the ones who are preparing them for either the workplace or if they transfer to the four-year school, but really looking at the community college as the epicenter of, education, change, within the workplace, because these are the same folks as well who are going into the workplace. And so looking at education, particularly community colleges and higher ed.
In thinking about this idea of the new normal, I couldn't actually come up with an answer to this question when I got it in advance, because I really feel like we get to define what the new normal is, right? And so I do declare, me personally, I do declare that the new normal is this continuation of speaking up, of calling things out from a space of love, of holding ourselves and each other accountable for our biases and our prejudices, of learning and growing, right? Of like, I've never known so many white people who read so many Black books, of like more of that, right? Of more acknowledging appropriation, of more having hard conversations, of more like paying attention to what's really important, and not just, there's nothing wrong with material stuff, but I really feel like the pandemic really forced people to take a look at their relationships and have some real hard looks at themselves. So more of that, right? And for me, and I've said this before at another talk, and it's something that is become like my mantra, my joy is sacred. Saying like, oh, joy. My joy is sacred. So more of that, like acknowledging that my joy is sacred, and I am not going to put it on a platter and hand it over to somebody else because of some law that may or may not exist to protect me, right? Like I get to continuously show up and decide who I'm going to be and how I'm going to show myself to the world. And we as BIPOC, as people of color, we have to continue practicing loving ourselves and showing up from that place and not requiring the validation of them. Because when we're constantly requiring their validation, we're constantly like losing ourselves and all the things that make us magical, right? And then for white people to like learn to love themselves in these whole new ways, because it's not until they can actually love themselves, their bodies, their humanity, that they look at other people, not based on the amount of melanin in your skin, but by the fact that you are also a human with humanity in a body, right? And then perspectives change and thoughts change and lives change. So my hope for the new normal is a lot of joy, a lot of love, a lot of discomfortable, it's not even a word, uncomfortable growth, right? And expansion, like personal responsibility for expansion. That's my new normal. I gotta write that down.
Yes. Whew. I wasn't gonna throw in mine, but now I feel inspired to do it. I have 3 things that I hope to see. One, I've seen so many Black and brown people of color, Latino, Latina, Latinx, and non-white folk being proud of who they are. And I've seen it on a level that I have never seen last year. I want that to continue. Secondly, educating yourselves, which is part of holding yourself accountable and holding others accountable. We can't like, there was an earlier conversation I was a part of when people was like, yo, we don't have the time for like, now we don't have the time for, hey, let's sit down and talk about race. Like, I'm gonna be honest, us folks is tired. We's tired of telling y'all that this thing is real and y'all not believing us. And like and so like I want to see more people, and I'm gonna be honest, I want to see more white people educating themselves on this and not just seeing what they see in the news. Like read Black books, listen to Black people, have that experience, have that, diversifying your environment, whether you choose to go out and talk and find somebody Black and be like, hey, what's going on and stuff like that. And third thing, really quickly, everybody get off your high horse and listen. Everybody, we get caught up in our moral high ground and like, I'm right, you're wrong. There's no there's some things we do not tolerate. Yes. But when it comes to start excluding people, sometimes that's necessary. But to cancel everybody out because they have a different opinion than us, how are we going to grow if we keep canceling each other out and saying, I'm right, you're wrong? We can't. So everybody get off the high horse. And the fourth and final thing, everybody truly understands what it means to love your neighbor. In the Bible, there's a story called the Good Samaritan, and some of you may have heard it. But this Good Samaritan finds somebody who's beat up on the road. He brings him to an inn and takes care of him and says, you know what? Whatever, he addresses his wounds and stuff like that, brings to the inn and says, whatever bills he racks up, I'm gonna cover. And it's very interesting because that Jesus said that story on purpose. The Samaritans and the Jews hated each other. It was a racial type of hate because of their ethnicities. Samaritans were half Jews, and Jews thought them inferior, and they hated each other. It was a back and forth thing. That example of loving your neighbor is literally looking towards the needs of somebody and taking care of it, despite who that person may be. That is what his definition of love is. And I want to see more of that in 2021 from all sides, everybody. All right, last question really quickly. See if you can sum this up in one question. What is your personal antidote for fear? Maria, go ahead.
So this one was easy for me. So it was. I practice fear, facing fear, and I teach my clients how to do this. So for me, it has these it's really one thing, it's love, right? But under that umbrella of love, there are these like 4 components, and it's faith. It's faith in knowing that this almost like trust in something greater than yourself, and knowing that you're connected to an entire collective, right? And that gives you this, it's take the first step when you can't see the whole staircase. It's Martin Luther King's quote, right? You take the first step, even though you can't see the whole staircase. It's stepping out in faith and knowing I'm going to have to face this and deal with it, because unless we really face our fears, it becomes a thing that becomes a bully. It's always lurking. It's always around us. It's always with us, right? So we have to acknowledge it. And then it's courage to look at it and call it out for what it is. A lot of times we make our fear this huge monster when it's actually this really little thing. And when we really look at it and point at it and say, oh, I know what that is. A lot of times we go, oh my God, I'm so silly. I created a whole story and a whole paradigm around this thing that's not even real, right? So it's when we allow ourselves to really have the courage to look at it for what it is. And then the next thing is honesty, which you had mentioned. I'm pretty sure Will and David mentioned honesty and the importance of being honest with yourself and with other people about where you stand and what you're dealing with and how what it is that you're actually seeing. We have to be honest with ourselves and say, I was taught growing up that white people are X, Y, and Z, or I was taught, we have to be honest. We have to see it. We have to take the steps to acknowledge that it's real, in our lives and in our perspective. We have to have the courage to face it. We have to have the faith to move towards it. And then once we get there, that's where we have to, love is a verb. That's where we have to take love and make it into an action, right? And it's like, okay, what are you going to do with it now? How are you going to make changes in this space so that that fear no longer haunts you? And this is no matter if the fear is a small thing or a big thing. If we take these steps, well, for me personally, I find fear to be an opportunity, right? I look at fear and I'm like, that is an opportunity to master love. That's what that is. Because otherwise, if I keep running from it, it wins. When I face it, I confront it, I'm honest about it, I take the courage to move towards it, I step out in faith, and then I root myself in love. Ooh, then like fear has no power. It no longer has any power over you, right? So that's what I do when it comes to fear.
You should write a book. Oh, wait, you have a book. Shameless plug, guys. All right, in one sentence, guys. Who's up next? One sentence. Antidote for fear. Go.
I'll go prayer.
Prayer. Love it. Amen and amen. William, go ahead.
Knowledge, understanding.
Yep. People say they fear the unknown. Once you understand it, it's not scary anymore. Love it. Great. David, close us out.
Yeah, that's gonna be everyone's tough to follow. Yeah, it's a little combination of everything. Knowledge, identify what scares you, find out the stakes, find out why you're afraid and what you think is gonna risk lose. If it's not a big thing, then the last part, be resilient through it. Fight it, go through it, have the courage. And that way you can do it. And second sentence, because I have to say it. Tell your story and listen to others. Best way to fight fight fear is just tell your story and listen to others.
Awesome. I want to thank each and every one of you guys for your opinions, your wisdom, the knowledge that you shared with us. This was amazing. I've learned quite a bit. And thank you guys for tuning in. We're now going to head to the last part of our celebration. I believe it's messages from politicians. And then we're going to close out with a final musical selection. Thank you guys for watching and have a wonderful night.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Good afternoon, everyone, and thank you for taking the time to be here. Like each of you, I wish we could be together in person for this celebration, and I look forward to seeing you all again when it's safe for us to do so. I'd like to thank the Montachusett Martin Luther King Coalition for their work to ensure that we could still convene, albeit virtually, to celebrate the Reverend Dr. Martin Luther King Jr., and Councilor Bernie Schultz for inviting me to be a part of this discussion. It's impossible to speak to you all today without addressing the immense amount of pain that our nation is feeling following the attack on the United States Capitol just 12 days ago. I believe it's important that we be explicit in the way we talk about this dark day for our nation. The assault on the Capitol was nothing short of an act of domestic terrorism. Those who perpetrated it are domestic terrorists. And as we've seen from much of the footage that has come out since then, many were also white supremacists. This failed insurrection was a direct attack on our democracy and a revolt against the progress we've made as a nation. By now, I'm sure each of you has seen the photo of the maskless man flying the Confederate flag in the Capitol, and that witnessing that heinous display of hate infuriated you just as much as it did me. In addition to the fact that this was the first time that traitorous flag had been flown by an insurgent inside the Capitol building, something that couldn't even be achieved by the armies of the Confederacy during the Civil War, the place where he carried it is significant as well. He walked the same hallway that's home to the portrait of Shirley Chisholm, the first Black woman ever elected to our Congress, around the corner from the very spot where Abraham Lincoln sat as a member of the House of Representatives, and just down the stairs from where the statues of Rosa Parks and Dr. King stand. Seeing those photos still makes me sick to my stomach, as does the notably disparate response to the attackers compared to what we saw from federal law enforcement during racial injustice protests over the summer. We all witnessed the aggressive response to Black Lives Matter protests in Lafayette Park, just outside of the White House and in communities around our nation. And it begs the question, why did those defending the Capitol not brandish the same riot gear, not deploy the same number of officers, and most notably not utilize the same level of force against those doing everything they could to cause them harm? This is the exact kind of incident that holds our country back from being great. It's evidence that we as Americans need to demand more from each other, every last one of us, if we're going to continue Dr. King's noble work to achieve what he so eloquently called the beloved community, his dream of an America where justice, equality, and love of one another are the basis on which we function as a society. No one knew the work necessary to create the beloved community better than his close friend, my personal hero, Congressman John Lewis. I will forever remember and cherish the opportunity to join John in Selma, Alabama for what would be his last annual civil rights pilgrimage this past March with my husband, my mom, and my 2 daughters. And I'm so grateful for the time he spent with Grace and Caroline, describing to them what good trouble was and reminding us what happened at the Edmund Pettus Bridge on that bloody Sunday 55 years earlier. But more than that, he spoke to all of us as we marched across the bridge, hand in hand, and in his words ring just as true today as they did nearly a year ago. He said, "On this bridge, some of us gave a little blood to help redeem the soul of America. Our country is a better country. We are a better people. But we have still a distance to travel before we get there." Now, as our community comes together to celebrate the life and the legacy of Dr. King, our children are watching and looking to us to lead the way, and to do so following the example of Dr. King and Congressman Lewis. That's why, as we continue their mission to achieve a better country, a better people, and a beloved community, we must do so free from the anger that is so often so easy to hold on to. And we must follow the instructions that Dr. King gave to a group of his supporters immediately after his home in Montgomery, Alabama was bombed 60 years ago with his wife and daughter still inside. Just minutes after that explosion, holding his family close, and with his house still in flames behind him, he said, "I want you to love our enemies, be good to them, love them, and let them know you love them." That is hard. I know it is. I was tested on my flight home the day after the Capitol attack, surrounded by 100 or so proud protesters calling themselves patriots, high-fiving each other and chanting, "Stop the steal." I'm still tested by the memory of that flight and the anger that consumes me when I think of it. And while we must hold those accountable who incited the insurrection at the Capitol, as well as the individuals who took part in it, we must also recognize the opportunity before us to follow Dr. King's example, to show love to those who, although we may not view them as enemies, have shown that they think of us as a threat to be eliminated. I commit to each of you that I will do my best to live Dr. King's words in this moment and in the difficult days and weeks and months ahead as we recover from the attack. Knowing that there are so many in our community who share in that commitment gives me hope that we will be able to get there and that we will do so together. So thank you all again for taking the time to be a part of today's event. Stay safe and stay healthy.
We shall overcome. We shall overcome. We shall overcome someday. Down in my heart, I do believe. We shall. We shall. We shall. We shall. We shall. We shall.
God, grant that we wage the struggle with dignity and discipline. May all who suffer oppression in this world reject the self-defeating method of retaliatory violence and choose the method that seeks to redeem. Amen.
It can be used either constructively or destructively. And I'm absolutely convinced that the forces of ill will in our nation, the extreme righteous in our nation, have often used time much more effectively than the forces of goodwill. And it may well be that we will have to repent in this generation, not merely for the vitriolic words of the bad people and the violent actions of the bad people, but for the appalling silence and indifference of the good people who sit around and say, wait on time. Somewhere we must come to see that social progress never rolls in on the wheels of inevitability. It comes through the tireless efforts and the persistent work of dedicated individuals, and without this hard work, time itself becomes an ally of the primitive forces of social stagnation. And so we must help time, and we must realize that the time is always right to do right.
And help welcome our honored, distinguished guest, the Reverend Dr. Martin Luther King.